I need to. So thank you, Dr. Rameshwar and Dr. Freudenreich, for inviting me. Very happy to be part of this presentation, and I'm looking forward to interacting more with you guys. I think it's a great program that you guys are involved with, and I'm really excited for you, and looking forward to hearing more about your input on what you've learned. So I'm going to talk today about scientific publishing, the different aspects of putting a paper into a publisher, the criteria for publicly posting that information, and the rights and responsibilities of authors in publications. So overall, I'm going to talk about manuscript preparation, authorship rights and responsibilities, the logistics with working with scientific journal publishers, the NIH public access policy for distributing information, publications for the public, and then authorship considerations. And we'll start off with journal publications. So you've done the work in the lab, or you're doing the work in the lab. You have some really good findings. And so where do you start when you're going to publish? So one of the first things you're going to do is look to choose the journal that you're going to publish in. And there's different criteria. Some of it is, obviously what field you're in, and the various journals that publish in that field. You want to look for a really high level journal. Journals can be measured by what's called a journal impact factor, which is every 2 years, there's a calculation for how many times papers are cited in journals over all the citations that could be cited in all journals. And that's journal impact factor can give you a sense of the scholarly excellence of a journal. So for instance, Nature Journal is a really good journal, and their impact factor is 46, I think currently 42.778. So it's not the only measure, and sometimes journals are very specific for a certain field, so they're not used a lot. They're only used by a small population of scientists. They're specialized in that field. So you have to weigh the topic that you're going to present, as well as the different types of choices of journals. Predatory publishing, I put this here, but I probably should have stuck it in the open access discussion. So we'll talk more about how NIH and others have really facilitated the access to scientific journal publications without the cost related. In the old days, you would have to subscribe to a journal for access to papers, and it was very, very expensive. So now in the age of electronics and cost savings to people that don't have access easily, we've begun to build a policy for open access. But with that has come predatory publishing. So you want to be careful that you're choosing a journal that has peer-reviewed process, that is not looking for just for profit, that they're going to be reviewing and processing your manuscript for consideration in a timely fashion. And there's definitely a lot of information out there. So you want to make sure that when you choose journals, you do not choose a predator, and a lot of the faculty would be able to guide you on that too. And then you're going to look at the submission guidelines of a journal. Each journal has very unique guidelines set for editorial criteria, submission, review process, etc. Most, if not all, journals now are electronic in their submission processes, so it's actually a pretty efficient process. There's editorial criteria that are very generalized for all journals, but they are maybe a little bit specific. I have an example here for Nature Journal, which, like I said, is actually a really excellent scientific publication journal. And so they really want original work, outstanding scientific importance, of course, and then reaching a conclusion that really has interest for other readers and scholarly works. The journal defines a lot of the criteria for the manuscript preparation, the format of the figures, size, file types, etc., how to prepare and what format you use for the citations. There's software to help you with that. EndNote is one example. Universities usually have give you access to that software. And then the editor-in-chief, once they accept your submission, will determine whether the publication warrants merit and should be considered for peer review, and then they'll assign it to 2 to 3 reviewers. Generally, a manuscript has standard sections. It does vary. Reviews are different, and so short reports are different, but a full manuscript, scientific manuscript, generally has abstract, an introduction, results, discussion, methods, citation sections, and sometimes supplemental materials. So manuscript preparation, authors' rights and responsibilities. So you're going to, from the very start of a project, talk to the principal investigator or your colleagues that are contributing towards the project on what the role of each person on the project is going to be, and having that conversation all the way through. So when you're at the point of manuscript preparation, you want to define the corresponding author. The corresponding author doesn't have to be the senior author. Generally, the senior author is the faculty principal investigator on the project that oversees the project and the laboratory, but it doesn't have to be. So the corresponding author is defined. The first author is defined, and that is usually the author that has put in the majority of the work into the project and will prepare the first initial draft of the manuscript. All the authors, all the contributing authors that are cited on paper must contribute to the manuscript preparation and approve of this. And then standards for the order of authorship is a criteria that you're going to consider, sort of who's the first, second, and last author. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later in the talk. There are definitely good standards set, but again, this is a collaborative scholarly contribution. So it can change, and there can be multiple first authors, last authors. So something to consider in the manuscript preparation, and as I'll talk about even before that. Authorship, responsibility, and rights. So when you submit to a publishing firm, they will take on licensing rights, but you will retain as author and the university the copyright rights. So any authors that have created work own the original copyright to the publication. So the authors must certify the accuracy of the reporting findings and agree on authorship. All authors sign off on this. The author retains, as I said, copyright, but they sign over licensing to the publication. So the publication can then process the publication, submit the publication, and make it available to the general public or to people that buy into subscriptions. And people still do buy subscriptions to publications. You can get access to publications earlier on. But generally, more and more, you'll see that there's this open access, and most people can have access to it. The authors can continue to copy, cite, and post online their paper for scholarly activities, and as I said, continue to hold copyright. Now, there is a kind of an unwritten rule, because if you hold copyright, you can say to others, you can't use my findings, but that doesn't really work in science because we build upon each other's findings. And the whole idea, especially with federally funded and other sponsored research, externally sponsored research, is that we are trying to build a collective understanding of medical and other types of research of processes. And our goal is to help the general public and help health all throughout the country and throughout the world. So really our goal is to be open, transparent, and scholarly. There are some examples of authors that have brought forth their copyright rights and tried to prevent or argue against people from deriving their work from the author's published work. But as I said, in biomedical research, we build always on our work. So there is this unwritten rule that the copyright is a protection, but it's not something that people use to argue against others using their work. And then when you choose a journal, you want to confirm that they have acceptance to the NIH public access policies, which I'll talk about in a moment, which requires them, once there's an embargo, a certain period of time, to allow access to all, not with anybody without a subscription can access the publication online. So authorship, communication is essential. So I have seen a lot of times where there's been disputes on authorship. Generally, it's order of authorship. And some of that has happened because there just wasn't conversations throughout. And, the work that goes into a manuscript can take many years sometimes. Students especially come and go. You want to really be scholarly and collaborative. And that works best when there are continually conversations about it. And actually, if you start in the graduate school, there's the AAMC has a kind of a guideline and covenant that you can sign off with your mentor. And one of the ideas is also, that communication of what your role will be in a project, what the authorship roles would be in any particular experiment that you design or be involved in. There are good guidelines out there. There are good scholarly works talking about guidelines for authors and standards for authorship. One of them is the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and they define here, and this is very similar to what journals also will show on their website for the definition of authorship: substantial contribution to design and planning, data acquisition or data analysis and interpretation. And so just doing data acquisition alone is not authorship, but contributing in a higher level of designing, planning, and acquiring data. Writing and drafting of the article or the major critical revision of its intellectual content, approving the final version for publication. All three of these conditions need to be met to be considered an author. And sometimes people will be given authorship that haven't played that role. That is unethical, and that's where the conversations come into play. But we try always to be inclusive of people that have contributed. Intellectual contribution can come in many ways. So that's where being collegial and having these conversations and being fair and understanding and all contributors is really essential. Acquisition of funding alone, collection of data alone, or general supervision of people in the lab doesn't justify authorship. So it's a really important conversation to have throughout the project. And I really encourage you to do that. And the faculty and principal investigators, they're very well versed in this. And so no question is a bad question, and talking to them sort of really early on is a good idea. And it does change, like I said, so keeping that conversation going. The NIH public access policy. So NIH established this policy really to improve transparency and reproducibility of publications. As we came to an age of electronics, it really becomes much easier to access publications. However, journals were increasing more and more and more the cost of publications. So it was almost becoming prohibitive to be able to access important biomedical research publications if you were a small university or if you are in a country that doesn't have large amounts of resources. And really what we're trying to do, as I said, is solve worldwide global health issues. And so it's really important that we make this information available to all. And it really has improved a lot, I think, the ability to learn and contribute towards science and curing diseases, understanding and curing diseases. So the authorship's responsibility is for deposition of the data into relevant databases, and citation on grants and publications. And so this public access policy is driven by NIH. I show a screenshot on the right where they basically walk you through the whole process. And the university libraries are actually very good resources for this process as well. You want to make sure early on that the journal does comply with the public access policy. There's a resource on NIH called through National Center for Biotechnology Information, where an author or a faculty will create their identification, and they can put in the various data and publications into the database that way. It's very easy to do. And that then creates a link in PubMed, which is one of the major search engines people use to look for papers based on authors and keywords, et cetera. And in the PubMed, there is given a PMID, and then that PMID is what also goes into citations on grants and papers to identify that paper and the direct link for people to access that paper. So when you when you first submit to a journal, you can disseminate the accepted version of the manuscript immediately as an author by sharing, copying, putting it up on the website, and putting it into your institutional archival database. After 6 months following publication, then it can be deposited in the funder's designated repository. Some journals will do that for you, others you will do it yourself. And there's a list and good guidance for that on the NIH website. How much time do we have? I'm wondering, not watching my clock.
Plenty. We still have 18 minutes.
18 minutes. So I'm not going to talk long enough, but I do want to show you briefly this little video on public access. I think you'll get an appreciation for that. So just give me a moment. Maybe not. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had it up front. 1 second.
Grammarly helps you work more efficiently, which makes accomplishing your work goals easier than ever before. Get full
open access is free, immediate, online.
Okay, apologies, I have it up. Sorry.
We've all been there.
I thought I was so organized. Okay, so here's a little video. It's sort of, I like it. It gives you a really good perspective of why open access was created in the first place and how it works. So let me give you, I'm not going to show the whole video, but
Open
my
access is free,
presentation will
immediate,
have it.
online availability of research articles with full reuse rights. This is about, first of all, making all this content available for anyone, wherever they are in the world, to read and access and build upon, so people can do interesting things and work in new ways with the material to really make the research literature much more valuable.
The history of the model is really publishing scientific manuscripts, especially ones with complex, detailed color figures, was expensive. And so if you wanted your article distributed broadly and widely, you sent it to one of these journals, and then they would manage the review process and the communications with reviewers and revisions, and eventually something would be accepted, and they handled the typesetting and the printing and the distribution of your scientific work. And it worked great. Science progressed pretty well, and it became, a good way to distribute scientific papers. And what's changed is, really two things in essence. First is digitization. You can now do everything electronically instead of printing it. And the second is that the journals started ratcheting up the price of subscriptions to many of their journals. And so those two things came sort of to a head where it's become almost the theater of the absurd with the amount that some journals want libraries to pay to subscribe to the journal.
Research has shown that journal prices have actually outpaced inflation by over 250% over the past 30 years. There are over 15 entire academic disciplines where the average price for one journal is over $1,000 for one subscription for 1 year. Yeah, in chemistry, the average title is $4,227, and physics $3,649, and it even goes down into like agriculture is still over 1,000, and geology and botany all over 1,000. And those are just the averages. Those aren't like the way out there. There's a journal called Tetrahedron that's $40,000.
The journals aren't producing the material. The journals don't employ the people who write the papers. They don't even employ the people who review the papers. And it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of what science is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about discovering new things and spreading that knowledge around. It's so irrational to think that these scientists like me are paid by the government to do research and to discover things and distribute that. And then, 2 years of work by 20 people is going to be compressed into a paper and then not made available to people. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so I think this problem of access to research is one that people run into all the time, but it's not one that they sort of realize. I know when I was a student, whenever I would be doing research and come across a great abstract and not have access to it, I just sort of moved on and thought, well, this is the way it is. There's, I didn't really realize that there was a system behind this, that was causing me to not have access. And I think students' educations literally depend on access to the journal literature. I mean, professors can only teach what they have access to. If you look at less wealthy countries, like low and middle income countries, they're really struggle to get access. And, so that's a real impediment that prevents researchers in those countries from being able to contribute fully or do world-class research.
I mean, I was not, even with this lack of access and even with my brother starting the Public Library of Science, I wasn't convinced. I didn't understand why this was a big deal. And then we had a family medical emergency and I was up at 3 in the middle of the night in a hospital next to my wife in the hospital room, surfing the web on the crappy hospital wireless internet. And I was trying to find out information about a particular medical treatment and I couldn't get access to the damn papers. And our doctors didn't know the answer to these particular questions. And we needed to decide about what to do with this medical treatment. And here I was, a trained scientist with the ability to read and interpret and understand many of these papers. And I couldn't get them. And that was the moment for me. I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
So this, of course, is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm not going to show the whole thing, but, to be fair to journals, we really rely on scientific journals. The peer review process that they help us with, they identify scientists in the field. They have those scientists review the manuscripts. That's just such an important element of what we do. And there is a charge. When you submit a paper, you do have to pay, ironically, the journal for the submission and publication. That is covered by NIH-funded grants. It's understood that is necessary for the processing administratively. The publication, the publishing firm does incur costs to do that. But this idea that information should be open to and access to all is tremendous, and it really has, I think, advanced things. I used to work at a small biotech company and we didn't have a big budget. And I was trying to do research based on abstracts in far too many cases. It's not good research. Good research is when you have access to the full publication. You really can read and look at the data and evaluate for yourself. So it's actually, I think, a great advantage. It does take some, responsibility on the side of the authors to make sure that it gets done in a timely fashion. It is required for NIH funding to be compliant. So it is a process that we've had to get used to. But now that it's working well, I think that it's actually a really valuable process. So I hope that sort of covers enough information for you guys. I'm wondering if you have any questions.
Debbie, before you go, one thing if you can address to them, because they're training as clinician scientists. So one day there will be faculty in medical schools like here. And one of the things I noticed among clinical departments, people just indiscriminately put people's name at paper. Like, for example, if you're a chair and you're in charge, that faculty below you have to put your name. So there's strict ethics in authorship. If you can just address that to them, that they have to have a significant contribution, if you don't mind addressing this.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree. I mean, there's far more gifting of authorships than should be happening. Yes, and that's where the conversation comes in. If you're not contributing intellectually and significantly to the paper, you should not be on. A chair, just because administratively they support the faculty member, should not be on. Those are difficult conversations, but like I said, there are good standards on those ethics. They're not laws though, and it is tricky because the order of clinical authors versus the order of basic science publication authorship is a little bit different criteria. It's almost flipped sometimes, where the senior author, the one that runs the lab, gets the funding and directs the project, is first author, not the one that designs and performs the project, under the faculty that runs the lab is the first author. So basic science, it's one way, and clinical science, the order is sometimes reversed. And there are guidelines out there. There's definitely ethical papers on the ethics of authorship and who should be contributing. And the journals, the really good journals, have very good guidance on their website that defines that. And now many of the journals are asking for, when you submit a journal, a listing of what the authors did, what their contributions were. And it's a general listing, so it might be row intellectual contribution and figure 5 design, but they are asking now for very specific details on that, because there was too much of this pressure to include authors that did not significantly contribute. And ethically, somebody should not be on the paper unless there was significant contribution. There is a section for acknowledgements, so you can acknowledge somebody there, but it is, I think, tricky conversation. And when there is a dispute, that's where you go as a student to the omnibus or involve the research dean, because those are difficult conversations, and not everybody is ethical and compliant about it. So it is important to stand strong, have those conversations, and speak up when it's not being done properly.
Debbie, can you tell them about plagiarism too, not to copy things, because we've had a case like this. As an editor, we go through this a lot. And what these journals are now doing, they're asking the university to investigate those faculty. And these students who can become those faculty could get themselves in a lot of trouble. So they may as well start from now, not to plagiarize.
Absolutely. Anytime that you do copy something, you need to cite it, even in a PowerPoint presentation, certainly in a paper, and you really cannot use the same words even, you really have to describe it in your own words. Grant proposals are the same way. They have software now that looks at a grant proposal to see if it overlaps with anything that you've already submitted. So you can't submit the same proposal more than once. And journals now are looking for plagiarism, as well as universities. And so you have to be really cautious of that. You don't want to copy anything. It is tricky though, because you're deriving from a previous work and adding to it, but that's where citation is so essential. And when you write a manuscript, you want to cite not just the most recent citation related to that finding, but the original citation. I see Peter has a question. Peter, did you?
I think that Peter was saying hello.
Hi.
He zoomed in. Yeah.
He's muted. You're muted, Peter.
Oh, sorry. I was just trying to say hello and I didn't want to interrupt.
Sorry, Peter. How are you?
No, that's okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lazzarino. And I'm sorry, you started speaking before I got to introduce you.
Apologies.
Dr. Lazzarino is the Assistant Dean for Research here at NJMS, and her office has been incredibly helpful with getting this program started. So really a tremendous help to your whole team, especially to Gio, who has really been phenomenal.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, all of you, and especially you, Dr. Ramshwar and Dr. Freudenreich. It's been tremendous to be part of this. Yeah, I'm happy to support. Thank you for the acknowledgement.
And just so you guys know, I think Dr. Lazzarino kind of touched on this, but oftentimes papers will appear behind a paywall. And there are 2 useful ways to get around that, or well, 3 ways. The first is oftentimes if you just search Google for the name of the paper, you'll find it on the PI's website or on ResearchGate or on other sources. So never be afraid to try that. Another great resource is the interlibrary loan system. So if you log into the Smith Library's website, when you search for a paper, you can actually request the article. And sometimes you get the article 2 days later, other times you get it 2 months later, but they usually can get you those articles. And the other way that Dr. Lazzarino began to touch on was contacting that corresponding author. Some professors are better than others at replying to emails, but almost every professor wants to be sharing their research. Their goal is for people to be seeing their research. And honestly, if you cite their research, it's better for them. So even if for no other reason, they are happy to usually share their work.
Lauren, we know research, the journals have clamped down on ResearchGate now. They
Okay.
have to remove all the papers, the list that they uploaded that are not bookmarked.
Oh, wow.
Number one. Number two, something else you said. What was the last part you said to them?
If you reach out to the PI.
Oh, yes. So that's another thing. The journals are very strict now with the PIs. They're sanctioning them from publishing in a journal for 3 years if they don't share information now. So things are moving in the right direction, I think, with the journals holding PIs responsible for sharing.
Yes. Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. Lazzarino. Do you guys?
Debbie, let's tell them to give it.
Okay.
Debbie, you did a great job. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that this is an exciting program, and we are very happy that people of your caliber, Debbie, are able to come down and give a lecture to these students. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm really glad to be part of it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording.